What's going on, Johnny Nation? Welcome to episode 170 of the Eye of the Storm podcast. My name is David Barov, and this episode is brought to you by the NIL Store. The big news this week is that the entire men's basketball team is fully signed, and now you can get every player's jersey, the home white, the road red, and the retros to get you looking sharp all season. The holidays are approaching, so get your St. John's hoodies, player graphic tees, and more today. At checkout, use the promo code STORMPOD20 for 20% off your entire order at the St. John's NIL store. Go to nil.store/St. John's and make sure you use the promo code STORMPOD20 for 20% off all of your Johnnies gear. Well, it was the first marquee game of the season for both teams. An early test, an early barometer, and an early report card of what you have for the long haul of the 2025-2026 season. With over 17,000 fans inside Madison Square Garden, St. John's defense wasn't good enough as the Alabama backcourt had their way with the Red Storm all afternoon. Thanks to 63 points by Labaron Philon, Aden, Holloway, and Latrell Wrightsell Jr., St. John's lost inside the world's most famous arena for the first time in 603 days. Alabama's electric pace, paired with their deep ball prowess, paved the way for a 103-96 win for the Crimson Tide. I am joined by Justin Kramer and Charles Branch, who covers Alabama for the Crimson Crossover podcast. He was gracious enough to have me on his show to talk about St. John's, so I figured let's return the hospitality and have him on to discuss the post-game results. For weeks and months now, we have heard Rick Pitino say he scheduled these games to find out where the weaknesses lie, and he and the staff wanted to know what they had to work on. We heard that after the Michigan exhibition, and we still heard that after Quinnipiac. Well, they certainly achieved that goal after Saturday's noon game came to an end. Perhaps it's better to lose this game in November and learn from it. I think we can agree on that, even though no one likes to lose. And that's the coach speak, yeah, albeit hard to deny the reasoning. But anytime you give up 103 points, there's going to be major questions and doubts that surround a defense that is trying to live up to, perhaps unfairly, to the number 2 defense from last year. Plenty to discuss, but Charles, you gave me the last word on your podcast, to which I looked silly predicting not only a win, but also saying that anybody that wants to run with St. John's would be playing into their hand, when in reality, man, it was St. John's trying to keep up with Alabama, and that played right into the Crimson Tide's hand. So, Charles, the floor is yours. What were your initial takeaways from the 103-96 win?
If you were silly saying that on my podcast, I was right there with you. And I think a lot of Alabama fans were right there with you. We are all still kind of in shock and awe of what Alabama did on Saturday. And I want to kind of start from the top, as I learned a ton about our team, but I also learned a lot about St. John's, that they are a really good basketball team. And I'm excited to get into that with y'all as well. Y'all talked about how good our front court is in Philon, Wrightsell, Holloway. I think we were surprised just how good they were attacking that St. John's defense. To come away from that game only having 7 turnovers was, we still, to right now are texting back and forth, like, how did we get out of that game with only 7 turnovers? And I think a lot of credit has to go to one of our new assistants, Chris Fleming. He came over from the Cleveland Cavaliers. Nate Oates typically replenishes the staff with guys from the NBA. And we attacked St. John's a lot differently than how we attacked Iona when Rick Pitino was there those first 2 times that we played them back in the early 2020s. So we're obviously very excited about winning this game. It was high level basketball, which I think is great for both programs, that you have this early of a game. And both of them did a lot of really good things. As you said, there's things that they got to learn, they got to improve on. But to come away for Alabama with the win, knowing the stretch that we have in front of us, that, hey, our you beat St. John's, what do you get next? Well, you get number 1 Purdue at home, and then you got to go to Illinois the following week. So it's nice as an Alabama fan to get one under our belt, but we still got a tough stretch. And I think the other thing that I learned just real quick is I know St. John's is a tough team. Like it's Big East basketball. You got to come ready to play. And we talk about blue collar basketball a lot at Alabama. And this team proved that they've got a blue collar attribute that I don't think last year's Alabama team, even with all the talent, even with the high ranking, never really showed. And that's something that Alabama fans are really, really excited about and will be able to get behind this team throughout the season.
There was a few storylines after the game and things that all the St. John's fans are kind of were talking about. And I'm so curious about what like the antithesis was for Alabama because for I know myself, Justin, you and I spoke at halftime. We've been talking nonstop since. It has to start with the guard play. The trio of Labaron Philon, Aden Holloway, and Latrell Wrightsell Jr. did something to St. John's on Saturday afternoon that's probably illegal in 49 states. It was I don't know if I've seen three guards just completely undress St. John's like that, and I think a lot of St. John's fans, and rightfully so, are trying to reason with what happened by saying, all right, we're not going to face a trio like that again. And I certainly agree. I think that's the best backcourt in the country. If you could find a better backcourt than LeBaron Philon scoring 25 points on 10 of 17, shooting 2 of 5 from 3, doing whatever he wanted. Like his first step was so quick. His one-handed layups every single time were just unstoppable. Aden Holloway, hello, first game back, 21 points, 9 of 18 shooting, 2 of 9 from 3. It wasn't really being talked about enough, I think, on a general basis from I think all of the college basketball media, because I think a lot of people knew LeBaron Philon and obviously went to the NBA draft combine, was probably going to be a first round pick and decides to come back. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And Aden Holloway comes in and he's essentially like the Robin to LeBaron Philon's Batman. But man, he was incredible. I think that was a real coming out party to for a national stage. I know he had a huge game against BYU in the tournament, where I think a lot of people, started to put him on a radar, but that was huge. And Latrell Wrightsell Jr., I mean, is this kid not one of the best shooters in the country? 17 points, 6 of 13, shooting 4 of 8 from 3. They combined for 63 points, made 8 threes. And the biggest thing to note here, too, 1 turnover. LeBaron came into the game, he coughed it up a few times. He's known for turning the ball over a little bit, and that is huge. Charles, you mentioned just the 7 turnovers as a team, but these guards were so impressive. Justin, I know we've talked about it, but man, I mean, your thoughts of what Alabama's guards did to Ian Jackson, Osiah Sellers, Joson Sannon, and the rest of that St. John's backcourt.
You and I have watched countless basketball games, both at Madison Square Garden and throughout the country, throughout the throughout the hemisphere, really going
Yeah.
back to the Bahamas last year. I have never in my life seen a backcourt that was so dominating in several facets of the game. Not only did they not turn it over, and that to me was the biggest key of the game. I thought that the speed in conjunction with St. John's length and athleticism would cause Alabama to turn the ball over, and that's why I thought St. John's would win the
Hmm.
game. That didn't happen. The score just kept going up for both sides, but ultimately the better team won yesterday. No questions
Hmm.
asked. But when I look at those guards on Alabama, not only did they have the ability to penetrate and get to the rim almost whenever they wanted, but their mid range game was a 10 out of 10. Their ability to pull up in the paint and hit a floater or kind of find a way to score. And then they were hitting threes from the Bronx. They were
Hmm.
hitting threes from like way downtown. And the ability to look like you're going to penetrate and then pull back for a three and flick the ball up with such ease over our long guards was incredible. And as the old adage goes, I don't want to see Alabama again. Objectively, St. John's is going to win a lot of basketball games. We know that. But the better team won yesterday, and that backcourt will continue to carry Alabama as far as they can possibly go. That is a dangerous basketball team.
Yeah, I mean the adage in college basketball is what you need guards to win, right? And It's a scary proposition 2 games into the season because, well, St. John's guards have a ways to go. And meanwhile, you just saw what amazing guards can do against you. Charles, you told me that even you guys are a little bit surprised about the turnovers, but like, what was the discussion? I mean, what was your group chats like during the game in regards to what this backcourt was doing? And this is, for all the fans listening, this is also without Jaleel Bethea, who is another huge guard addition to Alabama, who is one, somebody that got paid a lot of money to transfer to Alabama, but two, is very skilled. Was one of the top high school recruits when he initially committed to Miami. Um, so if you look at what these three did, now you're adding somebody else. Uh, I mean, it's terrifying. It should be terrifying for the SEC, and I think what it says is like it's so unfair to Alabama that they weren't talked about in a higher regard in the conference because what who's better than this in the backcourt? And I know that there's going to be some questions with the front court, but and we'll get to the front court. I'm jumping around here, but like Charles, I mean, this is just us heaping praise on you guys and saying that please don't ever play St. John's again while these three are on your team. So like, I mean, what was the fans feeling before, during, while this is going on? I mean, Labaron, I guess, but like, was everybody, I guess shocked, or what was the feeling with Holloway and Wrightsell adding to what LeBaron was doing?
Yeah, so talking about Aden Holloway, finishes 9 of 18, 2 of 9 from three. So that means he was 7 of 9 on 2-point shots. Those 9 2-point shots in that game may have been more 2-point shots than he had all of last season. He had been a guy who had made his living by hitting outside shots and letting somebody like a Mark Sears or Chris Youngblood or Grant Nelson penetrate and then kick it back out to him last year. You talked about some of those mid-range jumpers that Alabama hit. The NATO system has always been three-pointers, layups, and free throws. But I did feel like there was a wrinkle as far as getting 2 feet in the paint and hitting a floater or hitting a shot just outside of the restricted arc that we haven't really seen from Alabama guards since Nate Oates has been there. Labaron Philon was a guy who could get to the rim a lot last year as a freshman, but maybe didn't necessarily have the strength or as a freshman to hang in the air, take the contact, and make the basket that you need to at this college level. So now he's doing that. Now Aden Holloway's doing that. Latrell Wrightsell's another guy that was he had 5 2-point shots. That's he's typically a guy that's only shooting 3-pointers as well. So he was getting to the rim. And so we were making comments, especially early on. Justin, you talk about Alabama shooting from the Bronx. Like, yeah, I think I made the comment we were shooting from Carnesecca Arena in Queens. We kind
Alabama
of
fans pulled up a map and we're looking for like cities to like what's further. Let's keep going back and start naming them.
you know, we gave our PR guy or whoever at Alabama, our SID director, a hard time at halftime when he posted the
I saw
score and he
that.
said battle in the Bronx, and everybody's like,
Yeah,
Oh
Madison Square
God,
Garden is
cringeworthy.
nowhere
Yeah.
near the
yeah,
Bronx. Like, after just running the New York City Marathon, I can tell you it's a long way from the Bronx to get back into Manhattan those last 3 or 4 miles.
yeah.
But I think, David, I made the comment to you before the game. Hey, I think St. John's is going to shoot more 3-pointers than Alabama is. And that was first 5 minutes is like, well, that was way off.
Hmm.
And I think Alabama made a concerted effort that if they were open, wherever it was going to be, we are going to get these shots up because we feel like we might have an opportunity to run down some long offensive rebounds, but we want to continue to spread St. John's out. And what I've seen from Alabama, especially in conference play when they've gone up against a John Calipari team or a Todd Golden team at Florida, is they don't really help off a whole lot on shooters to stop drives. They want you to go more one-on-one and see if you can finish at the rim. And this is maybe the first time that Alabama has multiple guys that can get to the rim, whether they blow by you or whether they've got the physicality to make a shot like that through contact. So you didn't really see a whole lot of spraying out from Alabama on those drives because they were just there. And adding the wrinkle of getting 2 feet in the paint and
Yeah.
going straight up, even if it's not exactly a layup. So that was interesting from an Alabama perspective to see how we were kind of attacking a defensive scheme that has given us challenges in the past. And I know we'll get more into it as far as the St. John's guards, but I started thinking a little bit more after the game, Sellers and Jackson and Sannon. It's their second game in a St. John's uniform. They're all three phenomenal guards. And I texted you, David, I think halfway through the second half, where's Dylan Darling? Because I had
Mhm.
missed the news that he
Mhm.
had a calf strain. You schedule these games, both Patino and Coach Oates have said it. You schedule these games to learn where you got to get better. Well, all of those guys are phenomenal basketball players, and now they know they got to get better. And they're very early in this St. John's defensive system for Rick Pitino. So it was kind of like a perfect storm that I wasn't really seeing as an Alabama fan going into it. That, yeah, St. John's is really good, and they've got these good players, but maybe they still haven't completely gelled to the system like they need to and like they will once you get into February and March and they're making their move to win the Big East championship.
You bring up a ton of good points, a ton of things that we're going to touch on because my first inkling after the game, really, besides the disappointment of the loss, was like, man, I think we underestimated how good Alabama's backcourt was. I think that we knew they were good. I don't think we knew they were that good. I think that we thought St. John's could keep pace. And because we anticipated, we saw a fast St. John's team last year, and what we know Rick Pitino wants to do, we didn't factor in that they were essentially trying to play fast but still learn, while Alabama was trying to play fast. But a lot of these guys knew each other, especially that backcourt that all played together last year. There's a lot to be said about that. And I hope the St. John's fans don't start yelling at me and saying that I'm trying to find ways to spin this. But I just think that was visual evidence of what we saw. The way that the Alabama guards got into the middle of the paint with that floater. Labaron Philon every single time seemed to go one way and one-handed get to his spot, and he was probably laying on the floor afterwards. So it's not like they were scoring easy. These were tough makes, but it just goes to show you how good they were. And I think that they were scoring with a purpose. They were scoring in a manner that they planned for. And I think that that's where St. John's has ways to grow. And I think you're going to hear that from Patino. You're going to hear that from the guys too. I mean, my that was such a takeaway for me, Justin. I mean, I don't know if you felt the same. Am I trying to spin this? Am I making a little bit of an excuse for St. John's? Because I promise you, I'm going to hammer them on the defense.
2 years ago, Michigan came to Madison Square Garden. It was the second or third game of the year, and Doug McDaniel, who was in Michigan's backcourt at the time, looked like the best college guard I had ever seen for 40 minutes. There was nothing this kid couldn't do on a basketball court. And I hadn't seen him play prior to that. I think he played one game his freshman year. Now he's a sophomore at Michigan, and he went off. He was going to the basket at will. He was hitting three-pointers at will. He was getting steals. And St. John's was simply shell-shocked. It was like watching three Doug McDaniels yesterday, and that was why I was just having agita watching the entire game. But that's the reality. But let me give you the glass half full. Again, I don't think you see a backcourt like this for the rest of the year, but St. John's is going to get better. There were times, even last year, the magical season, where, quite frankly, early on, they just didn't look great. They lost to Baylor on a neutral court. This reminds me of that game. It was not nearly as close. Maybe it didn't go to double overtime, but it was a really good basketball game. And at one point, Alabama was up 11, and St. John's made a run to take the lead. I believe it was 82-81 at that point. And I actually thought for a fleeting moment that St. John's was going to win the game going away, that Alabama had basically thrown their best haymaker. It landed. St. John's got back up and then started pummeling on Alabama. Credit to Nate Oates and that team, because that is not what happened. And it was a rock fight the rest of the way until Alabama pulled away late. as much as I don't want to see this team, I do believe glass half full that there's a chance that they play again deep into March because these are two very good basketball teams and two teams that are only going to get better. And so you talk about the lack of St. John's continuity, and it's true. It's Zuby, it's Io, well, yeah, a little bit of Prey, but for the most part, about six or seven key new pieces. And this team will only get better, much like last year's team only got better. So, as much as it kills me, and as much as I hate being on the losing end of a shellacking yesterday, I'm not thinking that this is the doomsday scenario where the season is over. I do think that the best is yet to come, and you're going to be seeing both of these teams play deep into March, at least based on what I've seen with the early eye test.
Yeah, St. John's is now the biggest Alabama fan in the country. Charles, a few questions for you guys, and just for the New York fans and St. John's fans to kind of get a little bit of perspective from you. I mean, was the Alabama fan base surprised when Philon came back?
Yes. We had an emergency podcast that when he came back basically the next day. I think what's crazy about it is he said he was coming back the last hour that you had the ability to come back. I think I was asleep when he came back and I woke up to all these notifications on X of Labaron Philon has come back. He said multiple times, like, I'm ready for the next chapter. I had a good year in college, but I'm ready to move forward. And we were really, as Alabama fans, kind of stuck as far as having a point guard. You got Aden Holloway and you got Latrell Wrightsell, but Latrell's also coming back from an Achilles injury, and he's been a guy who has been injured basically his whole Alabama career. When he cramped up in the second half, the amount of like prayers for Latrell Wrightsell, comments that we got, um, it was a huge relief when we saw him back on the court in the second half. But we thought he was gone, and we didn't know who we were going to have at point guard. But he comes back and completely changes the trajectory of this team, and that's before it goes and has the performance he had Saturday, and that's before Aden Holloway has his performance. And one of the things that we are talking about as Alabama fans from the very end of the game, Philon hits that step back three, makes it 98-88. St. John's brings the ball at the court, ball gets knocked away, and Alabama ends up getting it. Latrell hits a layup, Zuby fouls him on the play as well. But the three guys who dove on the floor for Alabama on that play, LeBaron Philon, Aden Holloway, Latrell Wrightsell. That's three guys that are Aden's not. Oh, Aden and Philon are both, sophomores, juniors. Latrell's a senior. I don't know if we had three guys dive on the floor in a game last year. There was an intensity from our guys, kind of jawing with the crowd a little bit and stuff like that at the end of the game that you just didn't really see from Alabama as good as they were last year. And so it was just a different mindset that even me or other Alabama fans, I think, expected coming into the game. Like, we knew you always come in to play to win the game, cueing Herm Edwards at the Jets, I guess, trying to get some more New York references in there. But just really wanted to learn about this team. And then you learn, like, hey, we've got some toughness, we've got some grit about us, and we can play fast and spread teams out. We got to figure out our defense as well. But to your original question, I mean, it was shocking, that almost as shocking as how well they played Saturday, LeBaron Philon coming back to Tuscaloosa.
Has the opinion of Alabama, obviously 2 games in, and after this result, for you changed significantly in the sense that you're kind of feeling a lot more confident? I don't even want to go for the whole entire season. I'm talking now against Purdue next, against Illinois next, against Gonzaga next. I mean, you have to speak on behalf of Alabama fans, but for yourself as well. I mean, is there just a complete shift in how the fan base feels now?
I think there's a shift that there is more confidence we can beat Purdue, especially with how they played against Oakland on Friday. Haven't seen enough of Illinois. That's going to be another tough game in the United Center. That's basically going to be an Illinois home game. And then you get out to the Players era. And I didn't watch all of the game, but Gonzaga was really putting it on another SEC team in Oklahoma yesterday. I said on our space after the game that, look, we could still lose the next three games. And what happened Saturday is not a fluke. We're just playing really good competition. And so when we were together, you mentioned about my realistic take that Alabama could be 1-3 after this three-game stretch and still be fine.
Yeah, you weren't supposed to be 1-3 after beating St. John's, though.
Yeah. We were. It was only supposed to be 1-3 with the win being North Dakota.
Right.
And so I still think if Alabama now is 2-4, and it could still be 2-5 with the teams that are in the players era, that the team is still going to be okay. And I was going to save this for later, but this seems like a good time to bring it up. Speaking to your St. John's fans a little bit. Our team last year had all the talk about being a national title contender, started the year off number 2 in the country. We have a big win against UNC Asheville, and then we don't beat Arkansas State or McNeese State by more than 10 points. I mean, it was a slugfest. They're coached by Brian Hodgson, who's now at South Florida, but was a former assistant, and Will Wade, who's now at NC State, of course, has been at LSU. And then we go and lose at Purdue by 11 points. And you would have thought the season was over because of the sluggish start. And Alabama reached an Elite Eight last year for only the third time in school history. They beat Auburn at Auburn on a buzzer beater. They beat Kentucky 3 straight times. First time Alabama's ever had a three-game winning streak against Kentucky in the entire series. And you still look at last year as a disappointment that you didn't do what you were supposed to do or what you wanted to do. So I say this as someone who kind of struggled through last year with Alabama's team, that for St. John's, I think two of the biggest games are the William and Mary game and the Bucknell game, to come out and play the right way and still, as fans, like as long as we're racking up wins, as long as we still compete and are getting better, like we have a great season ahead of us. But finding ways to enjoy it than just being down about, well, we lost to Purdue,
Yeah.
or we let this other team come back in or stuff like that. So that's from my experience last year, trying to pass on to the St. John's Nation that y'all got a phenomenal basketball team. You got some things that you want to work out, but everything is still ahead of you as far as this college basketball season.
And Johnny Nation will push back and say, I don't even care about the next two games because it's not going to tell us anything and get us to Iowa State. That's already being said everywhere. So,
So
again, you're being far too reasonable for the hot take and the overly dramatic sky is falling St. John's fan base.
Well, and I'll just add, more present day. Look at Alabama football. We don't like bringing in football. We like to just talk about basketball. But shoot, everybody thought Alabama football was dead after losing to Florida State. And it wasn't until we played Georgia that everybody was going to potentially get back on the bandwagon. But the wins against Louisiana Monroe in Wisconsin is what built the confidence to now do what Alabama's football is doing. So I still would say these two games are really, really big, and it's important for people to be out in Carnesecca Arena supporting this team and continuing to have the energy behind this team.
I think St. John's PR is going to hire Charles to rally the fan base. I want to thank Rick Pitino for allowing us to come in and play this game, said Alabama head coach Nate Oates after the game. He doesn't have to play a tough schedule. They'll be one of the best teams in the country when it comes down to it. Charles seems to think similarly. Nate Oates was very complimentary. Obviously, him and Rick Pitino have a history. Justin, that's the hope, right? Rick Pitino, on the flip side, now gets to say, you're not even close to, like, don't listen to Nate Oates. You're not even close. You guys just gave up 103 points, and now he gets to hammer that home in his Pitinoistic way. He's going to say, we don't have the guards to keep up with that style. Regardless, if they don't see that again, you're not going to be able to keep up with great guards. That's what he's going to be saying in the next film sessions for the next 2 weeks. Ian Jackson, Josan Sannon, and Josiah Sellers are going to get abused tremendously in the film sessions and in practice over the next few days. you can keep adding the caveat of not yet. You'll get there. Not yet, not yet. But there's a lot of ammunition I think that Rick has now after this game, and we're going to start getting into the game a little bit more. But you know, he can take the screws to this team now. And to Charles's point, yeah, you gotta really. I mean, it, you want to see 30 to 40 point blowouts in these next two games, and you want to see these guards definitely wake up and see if this was a wake up call because Vegas is coming, Iowa State's coming, then it's Baylor, then who knows. But that Iowa State game now has a lot of pressure because St. John's dropped this Bama game. I'm curious if you think that that's going to be part of the motivation here, saying that, hey, man, look, we just played a top 15 team. There's a good chance that St. John's and Alabama flip in the AP poll on Monday. So, like, there's a lot of things that this coaching staff and our head coach is going to be able to really use as motivation and fire for this program.
The reason Rick Pitino is here is because he's not only a great basketball coach, but he's a master motivator. And so while I don't know that there's anything such as a good loss, I do think that he's going to use the loss to his advantage. And I'm not worried about the next two games. Obviously, I'm looking ahead to Iowa State. I expect them to beat William and Mary soundly. I think they're going to blow Bucknell out of the gym just because of the athleticism and the different style that Bucknell has typically played in the past. Say that all to say, it was a tale of two halves, right? You had a first half where St. John's front court was doing everything that we expected them to do against an Alabama team that is solid in the front court, but their money is made obviously with those guards in the backcourt. Zuby was doing Zuby things in that first half, over 20 points. Him and Hopkins looked like it was going to be them versus those Alabama guards. But in the second half, it was interesting because Zuby did not get a lot of run in the second half. Hopkins found his way to the bench. You saw a little bit more of the Mitchell, Prey, Io front court in the second half. And ironically, the St. John's guards, who had done nothing in the first half, woke up in the second half. And Sellers had a phenomenal second half. I know that he had 5 rebounds for the game. I don't know if they were all in this. I'm sorry, 7 rebounds for the game. I don't know if they were all in the second half, but he was like everywhere. And I know
He had 4 in the first half.
4 in the first half, but he was everywhere, getting those rebounds. Sanon, same thing. It was, the call was out to the St. John's guards, get defensive rebounds, and they did. Offensive rebounds, that's something I think we should talk about. But at the end of the day, it was a promising second half. It was just the defense to me that was and remains concerning. We scored 96 points. We scored over 100 in our first game. We're going to score 80 points a game. There's no doubt in my mind about that. It's just good offensive teams can give this team fits in November. We'll see where it goes.
Well, you jumped a lot there because, man, in the first half, you 53 points to Alabama, and that's 15 by Holloway, 10 by Philon, 7 by Bowen, 7 by Sherrill, 9 by Wrightsell. I watched the game back because I'm a masochist, and I'm looking at the defense, and I'm like, it's not terrible in the first half. The problem is that they really didn't miss. I mean, they shot 48%. Holloway 6 of 9, Philon's 4 of 9, Sherrill was 3 of 5. It was compounding mistakes, and the issue with that with St. John's, especially in the first half, is Zuby Ejiofor scores 21 points in the first half, looks like an All-American. Bryce Hopkins scored 15 points, was 7 of 9 from the free throw line. Zuby Ejiofor was 6 of 8 from the free throw line in the first half. And these two guys are shouldering the load, and you're sitting around, you're looking like, where the hell is our backcourt? Meanwhile, what are you looking at? You're looking at Philon, Holloway, and Wrightsell going absolutely crazy, but they're also getting help from their 2 big men. So it was so much pressure on St. John's. It was so much pressure, I think, from Zuby, who was having such a whale of a game. He only missed 1 shot in the first half, and he was hitting mid-range shots. He hit a 3. this is the reason why Zuby Ejiofor has been pegged as a Big East Player of the Year and potentially an All American this year. But Joe Sansanin had 2 points, Mitchell had 2 points, Sellers had 2 points, Jackson had 2 points. That was it. There was no help whatsoever to Hopkins and Ejiofor, and you can't win like that. How are you expecting to keep up? And frankly, you're probably lucky to only be down by 9 points. Uh, that's that was frustrating as hell because again, I'm going to keep bringing this up, and it goes to our next point that I'm going to make. In this NIL era, you have to start treating these guys like pros. And yes, they're learning. We are building the plane while flying it in the NIL eras, which goes to what Charles said earlier about the continuity and the guys playing together, that these guys are still learning. Yes, it's true, but there's just more pressure and there's just more expectations and there is just more of it here, especially at St. John's. You got a taste of it last year. The expectations are real. The fire is real. The want to win is real. Charles, we talked about that on your podcast. Like, it's just different now. So when you lose a game like this, yes, it's not the end of the world, but it still sucks. And it especially sucks when you start breaking it down on a molecular level of what the guards are doing. And yeah, all of them had much better second halves because it probably took Rick Pitino ripping them a new one at halftime. But it shouldn't. You guys got to get off the bus a lot better than that if they want to keep up, because you can't put yourself into such a hole. Because you look at it in the second half, 9 points. Look at how much work you have to do. You got to get down from 9 points, then you end up getting down 11 points, then you got to come back from that, and then you got to try and win. That's a lot of work against the Alabama team that ends up dropping 103 on you.
I mean, I think the deep where I thought St. John's, you're talking about the defense doesn't look bad, but you just didn't really get the turnovers. I mean, Alabama has been one of the more efficient offenses in college basketball for the past several years. I actually came into this year concerned about our offense because our previous offensive coach, Ryan Pannone, had just gone to Arkansas State. And as I mentioned, Chris Fleming came in. But Alabama averaged, I think 1.2 something points per possession with 7 turnovers. If you can find another 4, 5, 6 turnovers, whether you're getting the steals or just you got ball pressure that forces a bad pass out of bounds or forces a travel, you take away, those 6, 7 points, and now you're looking at a game that's tied. So I don't, whether from my perspective as an Alabama fan watching it, just thinking about what St. John's would do, I was just really surprised that there wasn't more ball pressure from the guards, knowing too that you had a lot of depth with the guards as well. That if somebody got into foul trouble, you could put somebody else in for them. I think St. John's in the game was 17 total fouls and 2 or 3 of them coming at the end of the game where you're fouling late just to get Alabama to the free throw line and extend the game. You're not playing defense, of course, to foul, but sometimes I look at it from an Alabama perspective and shoot, the only way we play defense is by fouling you. I mean, we can't play defense without our hands, but sometimes I like seeing that we maybe have a few more fouls than I'd like, because that means we are being the aggressor on the defensive side and we're not just letting the opposing team's offense run their offense, get their sets, get into a rhythm to where you get late in the game where you need stops and you just can't get them because they've been clicking since the ball was thrown up to start the game.
I wonder if St. John's didn't pressure Alabama because, one, they were scared about the speed that they were playing at. Two, they were hitting the three in the second half. It doesn't look great. They were only 3 of 15 from three in the second half, but they had the ability to hit it from so deep. And so if you essentially break any kind of contain, you're really vulnerable behind it. So I wonder if that had something to do with it. I wonder if Rick Pitino's not ready to deploy that yet, because we have seen him kind of hold that back until some more big games late, as well as maybe he's just not comfortable with these guys defensively to do that. So I think the defense obviously is, maybe the biggest question to talk about here, because 103 points given up is unacceptable completely. Like I don't know how to be nice about it. Like, you can't do that. You'll never win expecting that, especially in college. St. John's looked horrific guarding the pick and roll. They looked like they've never been able to defend a pick and roll in their life. The way that Philon was passing and Holloway was passing around to get, whether it was Aden to get on the roll or Bol, Bol Bowen was getting on a roll. I mean, it was it was frustrating to watch because it seemed to be a lot of the same kind of plays over and over again. Slip screens, little bit of a bump and a roll, and the Johnnies were just out of position often. Again, the only the seven Alabama turnovers that you mentioned, and the guards only turned over once. The other thing is 14 offensive rebounds. St. John's gave up 14 offensive rebounds, which led to 19 points. More so, the rebounds came from missed threes, but that allows Alabama to take any kind of momentum away from St. John's. There were so many times where St. John's got a bucket. On the other end, Alabama took a very quick shot, a quick three. They missed, and you're like, all right, get the rebound, go down the court, start putting a run together. And they didn't get the rebound, and Alabama finds a way to just get another shot and another opportunity, and that absolutely kills you. I thought the St. John's guards were slow. I thought they were a step or two slow with Alabama, which is scary because like these St. John's guards are good and they're athletic and they're big, but they were too slow to keep in front of Alabama. And the other thing was that Rick Pitino noted that his bigs didn't want to hit anybody in order to get rebounds. So overall, I think the defense sucked. Um, it's a lot to be desired. I think it's perhaps a little bit unfair expecting them to be the number two team in the country. That's fine, but I expect them to, be able to stay in front of their guys. I expect the guys who are 6'5", 6'4", 6'6", and long and athletic and can move laterally, unlike other teams that St. John's has had, to be able to try and stifle these kind of guys. And there was none of it whatsoever. There was no stopping these guards. And that's discouraging. That's disheartening going into a season where you're going to play probably not that great of a backcourt again, but you're going to play some talented guys. And you're asking for a lot from these guards.
Alabama turned the ball over 15 times against North Dakota, and I circled that on the box score. And I said to myself, that's it. That's how St. John's is going to win this game. And the reality is they had 7 points off of Alabama turnovers. To me, you don't need to see anything else. Their on the ball pressure was not terrible, but I felt like every time they took a step too close to really get in the guard's face, Philon would just go around them and either hit the open man or hit a floater. So it really didn't matter in that sense. I didn't have a terrible sense about that, but you hit the nail on the head with two other things. Second chance points, it was not that big of a disparity, but it seemed like every
Mhm.
time St. John's gained some momentum, there was a loose ball and Alabama got to it. And there was one time where there was a broken play, and all of a sudden Sherrill gets the ball from three, and I think he hit a 30-foot three. That to me was the dagger. I knew the game was over when that three went in late in the second half. And then offensive rebounds, right? This was how St. John's made their money last year. Zuby Ejiofor and RJ Lewis were a dynamic pairing on the offensive glass, and we won games that, quite frankly, we probably had no business winning because we broke the will of other teams on the offensive glass. Last night or yesterday in New York City, that happened to us where they were getting second chance points. And again, partially because threes were not dropping at as high of a clip in the second half. There were long rebounds, but we did look lost on a lot of those plays, and they would get a second chance, and when they got a second chance, they converted with those offensive rebounds, and that was the end of the game. I mean, we just didn't have enough gas left in the tank, or if the game had gone another 5 minutes, maybe, but there was we couldn't withstand that final run that Alabama made down the stretch.
Here's Rick
The,
Pitino. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Charles.
well, the rebounding was also something that I thought St. John's would dominate before the game started.
Yes.
And I actually give credit to our coaching staff, either talking to the players and a couple players that really stepped up. One being the true freshman, Amari Allen. He was the Gatorade Player of the Year
He
in
was really good.
Wisconsin. He has been talked about this summer like Noah Clowney was talked about a couple years ago, as far as, hey, this might be a guy that can contribute that nobody's really talking about. Two guys entered the game with double-digit rebounds, Zuby Ejiofor and Amari Allen. And I've seen Alabama be really good at offensive rebounding for years, just because, like you said, you typically get a lot of long rebounds and scramble situations. Alabama created some of those with deflections and stuff like that on the offensive side, but the commitment to boxing out on the defensive side, it's something that I've talked about for Alabama basketball for the past couple years, that you can't just rely on a Cliff Amore or a Grant Nelson or a Nick Pringle, something like that, to clean up the glass and let the guards go ahead and start getting to the outlets and continuing to run. You've you've played decent one-shot defense at Alabama, but you've given up too many offensive rebounds and second chance points. And there was a concerted effort Saturday from guys that you would classify as small forwards or, power forwards or even shooting guards that made an effort to go get rebounds. I talked about Amari Allen getting 10. Houston Millette got 5 offensive rebounds. And you talk about a guy for Alabama, he wears the number 95 because he knows and says you play basketball without the ball 95% of the time. So Alabama needs that hardworking guy with the type of offense that we need. He gets 5 big rebounds. And then I look at St. John's on the glass, and Zuby got his 10. Ozai Sellers got 7. I was surprised with Dylan Mitchell. He gets 4 rebounds. I was expecting more in the game from him.
So were we.
Okay. Bryce Hopkins was great scoring. He also only gets 4 rebounds. It kind of was like we're going to rely on Zuby to get offensive rebounds and defensive rebounds because he is that great of a player. And again, going back to those guards or some of those other guys, like, no, if we can, as a team, rebound, you obviously show that you can play fast and you got the guards that can get out and run. But if you're giving up second chance opportunities and second chance points, then you're just slowing your team down. We always talk about it's harder to play fast when you're having to take the ball out of the net. If you can get the rebound and your guards are still there at the opponent's free throw line, like, you can still get out and run. And that's something that Alabama, it surprised me how well we did Saturday against St. John's.
Rick knows that the Kentuckys, the Ole Miss, the Iowa States, they're coming. And, this team has a lot to improve on. Again, it's only 2 games, small sample size. This season's got plenty more games in it. I don't think anybody with a rational head on their shoulders is thinking that this season is doom and gloom. You're just reacting to the loss. And I think it's okay to be disappointed from the outcome. I think there's a lot of high expectations, like I said, from this season. But there's things to still be concerned about. Justin, the 3-point shooting in 2 games, especially the 3-point volume, is a concern, in my opinion. Charles, we talked about that. I think that St. John's is going to need to really throw them up to keep up with Alabama. St. John's only took 17 in this one. Alabama doubled it and took 35. St. John's in 2 games has taken just 36. Alabama took more in 1 game than St. John's basically took in 2. Ozai Sellers has only taken 3 from long range, something that he specializes in. The reason that he was brought here, Sellers had a good second half. He was the reason why St. John's started coming back, but they're not utilizing his best asset. He was 0-2 versus Towson, and he was 0-1 against Michigan. If you want to add in the exhibition as well, he's not hit a 3 this season. He has come here to be that marksman. And I think that him being on the ball is taking away from that too much because it's not allowing him to flow around the court and find and hunt those threes. And they need to start drawing some things up for him. He is too good at that. He's getting a lot of resources devoted to him to be here to do that. That's the truth. He's got to hit the 3 for St. John's. And especially when you look at a game like this where St. John's made 6 3-pointers in this game and 4 from your center. 6 3-pointers and 4 were from your centers. Ruben Prey took the most 3s on the team. How? Zuby's second 3 fell late in the game. So that's what we're looking at. You're trying to rationalize it, but like, man, Sellers, San, and Jackson, these are guys who are high-end three-point shooters as they were last year. And it's a great equalizer when we talk about keeping up with the high-end scoring teams like Alabama. And Ruben Prey is leading you in takes. And yes, he made two, and Ruben was great in the second half, but that can't be the recipe for success.
I'm not worried about it. I'll challenge you there. I'm not worried about it. I
Okay.
believe that the Alabama guards were guarding the 3-point line, so it wasn't like they had the opportunity to take a ton of 3-pointers. And if Seller had started throwing up shots with a hand in his face, we'd be killing him today, saying he took bad shots. I'm not saying Ruben
Draw
Trey should
something up
lead.
to get him open.
I'm not arguing with that. But again, the points were not the issue. They scored 96 of them. They scored
That I
108 in the
agree
first
with.
game. So it wasn't like they needed the 3-point shot to get back in the game. They were right there. My issue is, hey, sure, draw up a play. And I don't want Ruben Prey being the leading 3-point shooter on this team. Let me be clear about that. However, in the first half, again, they put the game plan was clear. Put the ball inside, go to the basket, get fouled. And it worked for all intents and purposes. In the second half, the guards came out. Our guards went to the basket. They were drawing fouls. They were getting contact. They were getting to the line. They scored their points. And they all had a nice second half, at least from the offensive side of the ball. The 3-point shots are going to fall. They didn't shoot well, but they shot 35% for the game. There's going to be other games where they shoot 45%. The law of averages will take over. The shots will fall. This team has to play some defense, though, because at the end of
Yeah.
the day, when you give up 103 points, you don't deserve to win the game.
That I agree with you, and I think Rick Pitino will agree with you as well. Here, Charles Justin, Alabama's 103 points were the first time that St. John's have given up 100 or more points under Rick Pitino. Alabama is the first non-conference opponent to score 100 points against St. John's since Niagara in 2004. Who had that trivia question locked in? I think nobody. So that's certainly something. Charles, I'm curious if you had if you had the same thought that a lot of us did, because in the second half, especially after what he did in the first half, Zuby Ejiofor sat for what felt like forever. He was subbed out at the 12:21 mark. He came back at 6:51. It felt longer than that, but also he only took four shots in the second half. The first one, a dunk, came at the 17:35 mark. The second attempt wasn't until 5:26, and the rest came in the next 2 minutes until he hit a three with 47 seconds left. Patino said that he had to rest him, that he didn't want to be called Tom Thibodeau because he was running his guy too ragged, and that he was expending a lot of energy in the game. And I certainly understand that. And it kind of goes back to a lot of my other points, especially in the first half. It's like the guards didn't do so much. So like Zuby had to do everything. And when he's down there and he's, banging around, you feel for the guy. It's like, listen, you need some other guys to step up. And in the second half, the guards did. But I'm just curious if you guys were, sitting around and like hoping that, Zuby wasn't going to come back into the game.
It I think it was around the 8, 9 mark. St. John's was making a little bit of a run, but they camera went to the bench, and it wasn't just Zuby sitting on the bench, but he had Bryce Hopkins right there next to him
Hmm.
as well. And we probably had a 6, 7 point lead at that point, but I was really surprised. Like, why are these two guys not in the game right now? Especially with how that half has started, which typical Alabama half, you're putting the team in the bonus before the first media timeout. And
Mm.
Zuby had done such a good job attacking the rim in the first half. He did knock down a three in the first half as well. But you knew our weakness. I love Aden Sherrill. Aden Sherrill was one of my favorite players last year. He started a little bit slow for Alabama, but I know he's going to keep getting better. Noah Williamson's got to get better for Alabama. The loudest I yelled yesterday was when he clotheslined y'all's player, because it's not what I like to see. And also we were up 11 points at that time, so that's an intentional foul, and St. John's getting the ball
Right.
back. And then we got Collins and Jaka, who's a 17-year-old just reclassified, who played 1 minute in the second half to start, got a foul, got a turnover, and was done the rest of the
Mm.
game. We were talking about 3-point shooting a little bit. And yes, Prey and Zuby take more than half of your 3-point attempts, or maybe just under half of your 3-point attempts, being and going 4 of 8. Both guys look like they have a good shot, and I know those are not the guys you necessarily want maybe taking those shots, even though they hit 50%. but it does make me wonder, should they have maybe shot a few more? Because Aden Sherrill or Noah Williamson, whoever was playing for Alabama, was not going to leave the restricted
Yeah.
area. I've seen that at Alabama when we played North Carolina in the Sweet 16 2 years ago, and they had Seth Trimble and a couple other guys that were not good three-point shooters. And of course, they come out and hit their first three or four, but we still just made them shoot from there. And law of averages finally kind of went back to how it was. But you just wonder if you're Zuby Ejiofor, who's obviously a senior leader for this St. John team, Ruben Prey, who I looked like had a really good shot. He hit the big three, as the shot clock was expiring in the second half. If they had shot a few more three-point attempts in the game, does it make Aden Sherrill have to come out and guard a little bit more and then maybe give some of those guards a little bit more room to operate to get an outside shot? Or as athletic as Zuby is, and Aden's running at him, obviously there's a reason why they didn't want Aden Sherrill. Exactly, Justin. Pump fake, go around. Now you got Alabama in a scramble mode, which is probably going to end in a foul and maybe an and one opportunity for St. John's.
Were you surprised that Alabama was up 11 and then essentially blew the lead?
No, because I've seen us do that so many times last year. When we were up 37-30 in the first half, Coach Patino called a timeout. St. John's immediately 8-0 run. And I'd seen so many of those last season that I probably got it somewhere. I started tracking how many times we gave up leads or gave up runs when the opposing team called a timeout. I started tracking win probabilities where we would hit 85 to 90% chance to win the game, and it would drop all the way back down to 50% or less before we eventually would close it out. So I'm not surprised that St. John's got back in the game. I'm disappointed from an Alabama perspective that we couldn't close it out, but it's something that I feel like I'm having to learn as an Alabama game, that as fast as we play and as many possessions that are in the game, when you're up 9 points, it's like being up four. When we're up 18, it's maybe being up like eight. Like there are so many opportunities for a team to get in a game, especially when we hit a cold spell where we don't hit two or three shots
Mm.
and we can't get a stop on the defensive side. And I'm also not surprised. Again, I'm gonna keep saying it. St. John's is a phenomenal team. They got a lot of toughness about themselves and they weren't going to quit. So I wasn't surprised from that side of it either.
It was interesting because it was like kind of the way that it happened. They sort of chipped away. It wasn't like three after three after three after three. And when the three that did fall happened, Joe Sansanin in the corner in front of the St. John's bench, and that garden erupted. Justin, I don't know about you, but that might have been a top three loudest Madison Square Garden environment.
Yeah, and it's because of the expectations, right? Last year was a hell of a ride, but you came into this season as a top five, top six team. In the back of your mind, you're saying, if things break right and you beat Alabama and maybe you beat Iowa State, maybe you cracked the top three. Florida took their early loss to Arizona. So I think that fans naturally saw this as one of those measuring stick games. It was something that was circled on the calendar. And just because of the flow of the game, when St. John's was down basically for the first 30 minutes of the game, 33 minutes of the game, that three in the corner was absolutely electric. The Garden went crazy. And it goes back to what I said before. I thought St. John's was going to win the game, and I wasn't sure that it wasn't going to be handily at that point. But Alabama came right back, and that came back to St. John's not being able to get that key stop.
Yep.
When every single time they needed a stop, Alabama was able to penetrate and score or hit a three and score. And they could not extend the lead past 2 points, and Alabama came back.
Literally right after that shot, though, Alabama goes down, gets their own rebound off a missed three, and Bol Bowen gets a layup.
Yep.
That's kind of what happened. Prey hits a second three to give St. John's the lead back, 84-82, 7:10 to play. And again, this is kind of what Charles was talking about with Hopkins, Jackson, and Zuby all on the bench. it's like you could take positives and negatives from all of it. Why did these guys sit? But on the other hand, look what St. John's was able to come back into the game with Sandin, Sellers, Prey, Io, and Mitchell on the court. Encouraging, because that's essentially kind of like a mixture of the second and first unit. Again, like, that's kind of what this kind of a game is, where from a fan perspective, is that you try to pull the bad, you try not to overreact too much, you try to make sense of everything. And I think that for St. John's, the biggest thing is that there's a lot to clean up. There's a lot to work on. I think it's especially on the defensive end, because like you both have mentioned, like Patino has mentioned, like the offense wasn't the issue. You scored this many points, 99.9% of the time, you're winning the game. This kind of a game proves to you that, yeah, you can keep up offensively. You just, the style of play, I think, is what was concerning. And I hope that that's what they learned, because St. John's guards tried to keep up with the Alabama guards. They tried to take some of those quick shots like Alabama guards were doing, and that took them out of their rhythm. That took them out of their game. They took some, I think, ill-advised 2-point shots that seemed hurried. And again, Alabama's used to playing like that. St. John's is kind of still learning. And Charles, I know that Taylor Bol Bowen is somebody that Nate Oates was really hard on, especially after the first game for Alabama, and that he comes back and he has a monster game that I think probably was really encouraging for Alabama fans. But for St. John's, I mean, he was really difficult to stop. He was really impressive. And when you pair him with Cheryl, I think, as well as the freshman for you guys, Houston Millette, who's just like the most lunch pail kind of guy that you could have. This team has the making of something that's really special. And I'm curious, from your perspective, as we're going to wind down here, that for the rest of the season, is the hopes for Alabama now, hey, I think we could really fight for this SEC crown.
Absolutely. And so talking about Taylor Bol Bowen, one of the topics of conversation after the game yesterday was he ended up taking the five position late in the game. And you had Aden Sherrill on the bench. So he was guarding Zuby Ejiofor a little bit late towards the game. So from an Alabama perspective, if you can put Taylor Bol Bowen at the five and you have an opportunity to get all three of those guards on the floor at the same time, and then you put in a Houston Millette, an Amari Allen, a Keaton Bristow, who's recovering from a sprain right now. You mentioned Jaleel Bethea at the top of the show. I mean, he's got to get back and he's got to fight for minutes. As good as he is, he's got to
Yeah.
fight with Houston Millette and Amari Allen. I was disappointed we didn't get to see a ton of Davion Hannon, and I don't know how many minutes we really would have gotten to see of him. He's really in his career right now in college basketball. It was his second game of his career. He's a defensive guy. He's not really a scorer.
Wasn't
Um,
he wasn't he the one who went up for the dunk and he fell on his tailbone and he
yes,
was in a lot of pain? Yeah.
he was in a lot of pain. Not enough pain though to be. It looked like every time we hit a shot, he was jawing with somebody in the front row. That freshman exuberance, I guess.
He got a little New York in him. That's all right.
Yeah, yeah. But we thought when the team was coming together for Alabama, this is what Nate Oates wants at Alabama, because except for maybe Collins and Jaka, who probably won't get a lot of run this year, you can put five guys out there and spread the floor, and all five of them can shoot it from three. It may not be the 33 or 35% you want, but you can really spread the floor. I liked Cliff Amore for us last year. I think Cliff got put into bad situations last year defensively because we had certain players that just wouldn't play defense, and he had to do a lot on his own, but got a lot of blame for it. Now you've got it, but he wasn't going to be a guy that was going to shoot from three. He was a pick and roll guy, and there was times where we probably forced it to him on lobs that generated a lot of turnovers. Now you can really put five guys out on the perimeter, and it's pick your poison, and it opens up driving lanes for the three guards that we've talked about. The versatility of Bol Bowen is exciting. The versatility of a lot of Alabama players is exciting as Alabama fans. We definitely feel like we can compete in the SEC, and I think for us, it's just being realistic and keeping a level head as we go through this non-conference play.
Yeah, I
You
think
guys remind me a lot of a team that we see every year in the Big East in Creighton, where they would spread the ball five wide and they could all shoot. They didn't really have a traditional big man outside of a Kalkbrenner, but even he could pop it from three. The difference is you're 10 times more athletic, and therefore you're 10 times more dangerous. Because not only when the shots are falling, I don't think that there's a way to beat you guys. You have to hope, though, that you go cold and that you kind of have one of those defensive lapses and that a team wins a close game 92 to 90. But when you guys are firing on all cylinders, you can beat anybody. And I'll be frank, I think you're going to beat Purdue. And I know it's easy for me to say that, but just in terms of the matchup, I love the matchup for you guys. And I was watching a little bit of tape on Purdue. I was looking at their roster. I think it's a really good matchup for you guys. Selfishly, as a St. John's fan, I'm very happy that we have William and Mary next. I think that they have time to go back into the lab and work, but I do wish you guys nothing but the best of luck the rest of the way. And it starts with a big game against the number one team in the country at home.
Look,
yeah,
I'm glad you
absolutely.
invoked Creighton because that we were able to give you a look for Creighton because I was telling David there's a section of our fan base that says Creighton is our biggest basketball rival. So to be able to give a St. John's a look and get y'all ready to sweep Creighton this year, that will make Alabama fans tickled to death. So I'm glad we could do that for you.
I brought up Taylor Bol Bowen for a reason because he drills a three and then it was 89-87, and then in the blink of an eye it was 100 to 88. St. John's erases an 11-point lead from Alabama, and then Alabama scores the next 14 of the 15 points, and like you're just you watched it kind of just fizzle away, and that was tough because they fought so hard. And again, that goes back to me saying that how much energy is expended fighting back. And last year, that was the bread and butter. Yeah, they were able to rely on the defense to fight back, and in this one, that just wasn't the case, and that is certainly unfortunate. Justin, St. John's gets hammered in the paint 54 to 40. They lost a rebounding battle. They were outscored by 15 on the 3-point range. It's a frustrating outcome. I think that we're going to have a lot to look at in this game. I think there's still questions. I'm very curious why Lefteris Leotopoulos and Kelvin Odie didn't play in this one. We essentially saw a very shrunken down 8-man rotation in this game because Dylan Darling was out for the calf strain. After the game, Rick Pitino did say that they're going to try and get Darling back for the next one, but if they have to keep him out, they will because the calves are tricky. I thought it was interesting. Don't know if you read this yet, but the great Mike Vaccaro, friend of the podcast, the New York Post, wrote an article basically saying that this was exactly what probably Rick Pitino needed and wanted. If you put a gun to his head, essentially saying that, you know, you learn from the loss and you really need to get these lessons out. What's funny though is that last February, Mike Vaccaro was on the podcast after the Villanova loss, which was the first loss St. John suffered after a while, and he said kind of the same thing about that loss. That like, listen, it's better to get humbled now and lose this one now than do it later and learn from it. So now you do that way earlier in the season and see what that does for you later on. I can buy it. I get it. It doesn't make the loss easier to swallow. I think it makes Vegas a little bit more important. I think there's a lot of emphasis now on Iowa State specifically. And you and I know because we deal with the metric stuff all the time. We talk it nonstop. I think you take the Iowa State win over and concede the Alabama loss, especially because it's on a neutral court. I think all eyes will be on that game. I think it's going to be a huge, huge matchup, but it's a really big opportunity for St. John's because I think they really would like to obviously take that and sort of flip your non-conference big game feel because you're going to have six of them, and now you just dropped your first one.
From a metric standpoint, Kentucky on a neutral court, Iowa State on a neutral court, whoever we get after Baylor, those games are going to have more import than a game against a really, really good team at home. It's just the way that works. We've talked about that offline 1,000 times. What you need to see, though, is a team and how they respond. The last year after the Baylor loss, they went out and they absolutely waxed Virginia the next game. Now, Virginia was not as good as any of the teams we're talking about with Kentucky and Iowa State, but the reality is St. John's needs to tighten up the screws. They need to tighten up the defense. And they need to win some games handily so that when they go into that Iowa State game, that's now the next one that's circled on the calendar. But you have to kind of start playing better now so that you can be well prepared for Iowa State. But yeah, I mean, technically, if you said to me, gun to my head, pick one of these two games, I'm going to take the Iowa State game on
Yeah.
a neutral court. It has more import than this game. Although I think that both of these teams are going to help carry our net the rest of the way because I expect both of them to finish with nets in the top 12.
Just a final few points, especially about this game and just about moving forward. Justin, Ian Jackson, 14 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, 1 block, 12 points in the second half. But again, only played 23 minutes, and it took him forever to get going. Ozai Sellers, somebody else that took a while to get going. He was a non-factor in the first half, besides the rebounds, which is a good thing. And the 7 rebounds that he had total is great, very commendable, especially you mentioned it, that Rick Pitino got on them about getting the rebounds from the guards. Ozai Sellers had 12 in the second half, 5 of 8 from shooting, but again, he didn't even take a three, which is going back to my point concerning, and I want him to shoot it more. Joson Sanin had 5 in the second half. Dylan Mitchell only had 5 in the second half. And again, Zuby Ejiofor with 6, Bryce with 4 after having 15 in the first half. So, I mean, just I really want to focus on the guards here, especially in the second half, because they did wake up. They did help St. John's get the lead. They did help kind of fight them back into it. So, just your thoughts about the real difference of the first half to the second half with Sellers, Jackson, and Sanin.
It looked great in the second half. I mean, the reality is this is what they're getting paid to do. Call it for what it is. They're getting paid to score the basketball, and they're quickly learning, or will learn very, very soon, that they're getting paid to defend as well because Rick Pitino won't play you unless you're playing defense. So it was a promising second half. The team was starting to wake up, even though, again, the result wasn't what it was. But this team is going to play better basketball going forward. That's what Rick Pitino teams do. And now with the NIL era, with 7, 8 new guys every year, it can take a little bit of time because that continuity just isn't there from the year before. But I think that if nothing else, the second half showed you that there's a lot of offensive weapons on this team. They can play inside, they can play outside. We haven't even seen that barrage of 3-pointers that you're kind of asking for. So they can beat you in a lot of different ways. And last year's team, they beat you because they kind of just pummeled your head in and made sure you turned the ball over 20 times. You might still see that. You don't see it yet, but there's the pieces are in place with the Zubys and the Dylan Mitchells that you might get there. So again, you got to just tighten the screws. I think the best is yet to come, but we haven't seen the guards play 40 minutes of good basketball in a sustained game because I would argue that when you see that, this St. John's team is going to be very hard to beat. We just, we haven't seen it yet. We've seen it in spurts, but we haven't seen the full package. So it's only a matter of time.
Well, they got 2 games to work on that coming up next. St. John's drops their first non-conference game of the season, their first major test of the season, 103-96 to Alabama. Alabama certainly moving up in the AP ranks on Monday. St. John's probably on their way down a handful of spots. And Red Storm fans, you are the biggest Crimson Tide fans the rest of the season. So make sure that you're watching, checking out Nate Oates and his club for sure. St. John's, well, plenty to work on, 2 bye games to do so, and then it's Vegas. So I will see all of you next Saturday at Carnesecca Arena to work out the kinks and to hopefully get things back on track. That's for sure. He's Justin Kramer. That's Charles Branch. Charles, thank you so much for joining me. You can catch Charles everywhere covering Alabama basketball. You won't find a better college basketball fan for his team and coverage. Check out the Crimson Crossover podcast. They are a phenomenal group of guys who absolutely bleed crimson and love their Tide. Charles, thank you so much for allowing me to come on yours. I hope you enjoyed being here. And again, we are certainly rooting for you guys the rest of the way.
Look, this has been awesome. I appreciated all the positive comments from our podcast previewing the game from the St. John's faithful. I think there's a lot of similarities between both fan bases that really care about their teams. It's awesome you are the Red Storm and we're the Crimson Tide. It seems like a match made in heaven. I'm going to continue to follow you guys. I do think St. John's is a national title contender. And one of the best things about this game is it's game one of a 2-game series. So we get to talk again. We may get to talk again this year, like Justin talked about. We may be previewing a Sweet 16 Elite Eight game, but we get to keep hopefully this friendship going and get to talk again when y'all get to come to Birmingham next year. But good luck to the Johnnies the rest of the way. We will be pulling so hard for y'all against Creighton this year. And of course against Kentucky and Ole Miss and all your other games as well. But can't I think college basketball is better when the Big East is better, and the Big East has to be better when St. John's being good. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with y'all and looking forward to continue to talk basketball. Maybe it's on the side channels at some point, but watching St. John's continue to have a lot of success this season.
Appreciate that, Charles. Johnny Nation, thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, Johnny's drop at 103.96 and work to be done as always. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you next time.